With this being our presidential election year, I thought it would be kind of interesting to look at a few vice presidents who served in the shadow of the great men. Let's begin with Thomas Marshall, who served from 1912 to 1920 with Woodrow Wilson. Marshall was the first vice president to openly treat the position as a joke. He was once asked how he got elected, and he replied he credited it on the ignorant electorate. He had a great sense of humor about him, though. After the election, he sent President Wilson a book that he inscribed, "From your own vice, your only vice." The president didn't find it at all funny, though. When groups toured the Capitol and peered into his office, he would tell them to be kind enough to throw peanuts. Thomas Marshall was from Indiana. In fact, he served as governor before he was elected as VP. And he once claimed that he was not surprised to have been nominated because he said Indiana is the mother of vice presidents, the home of more second-class men than any other state in the Union. You may have heard of Hannibal Hamlin. He served from 1861 to 1864 with Abraham Lincoln, and he hailed from Maine. Once Lincoln was nominated, the Republican Party needed someone for the East Coast, or the East, which would balance out their ticket. Hamlin had political experience, but wasn't controversial. He had almost no legislative record, though. He is quoted as having said that he looked forward to serve as vice president as it would be neither hard nor unpleasant. You would think, being VP during the Civil War, he would have had a very prominent role in history, but in fact, he is considered the most invisible VP in history. President Lincoln lost faith in him and completely ignored him. He left Washington and returned once each year to open each new session of Congress and then right back to Maine. For his second term, Lincoln dumped Hamlin in favor of Andrew Johnson. Then there was Garrett August Hobart, who served 1897 to 1899 with William McKinley. He was a Republican from New Jersey who had lost his only bid for office, U.S. Senate, before becoming vice president. He got the nomination not because of ability, but because he was one of the richest men in the country. Some say he was one of the most influential vice presidents ever. He is mostly unheard of because he exerted his power behind the scenes, where he treated senators with many extravagances to buy their votes. You know, I'm 60 years old, so I've seen more than a few vice presidents. In my time, I would say the most inept vice president would have to have been Dick Cheney, who served with the equally inept President Bush, the son. But anyways, many historians of politics class William Almond Wheeler as the most boring of all Republican vice presidents ever. He served from 1877 to 1881 with Rutherford B. Hayes, and he had a reputation for honesty which made him a rare commodity in Washington, D.C. He is the only VP ever nominated as a joke. Who says no one in Washington has a sense of humor? I'm not pointing a finger at President Obama, but many believe he is our first homosexual or bisexual president. I don't know about that, but he would not be the first. That honor would appear to go to William Rufus Devane King. Yes, that was his real name, and he served in 1853 with President Franklin Pierce. He was a Democrat from Alabama. He was known more for his effeminate clothing and demeanor than his politics, swish swish. In 1834, he struck up a lasting friendship with future President James Buchanan, and historians speculate that they had a homosexual relationship, but I don't think it was ever proven. On Inauguration Day, he was in Cuba trying to make a recovery from tuberculosis, and he was too sick to make it to Washington. He did, however, make it to his home state for a victory celebration, and then he promptly died. He served only 6 weeks as vice president, and he was the only bachelor vice president and the only vice president to ever been sworn in outside of our country, and the only one never to enter Washington, D.C. He was not replaced, and the office remained empty until the next election. Lastly, let's look at Richard Mentor Johnson, who served from 1837 to 1841 with Martin Van Buren. He had been a Democratic congressman from Kentucky. He was once described as the most vulgar man of all vulgar men in the world. His affairs scandalized Washington society. He married 3 times, and each time to a slave woman. When his second wife ran off with the man she truly loved, Johnson had her captured and then sold her at a slave auction. He was the only vice president ever elected by Congress rather than by popular vote because he was so incredibly disliked. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our little tour of vice presidents in history. While you're here, why not tick on that subscribe tab? It only takes about half a second at most, so you don't miss any programs coming up here on the Dennis Morrison channel. I hope you have an awesome evening, and God bless.